Good afternoon, and welcome to the African American Heritage House and the 2021 CHQ Assembly. My name is Errol Davis, and I have the distinct honor and privilege as serving as president of the African American Heritage House here at Chautauqua, or AAHH as we fondly refer to it. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this 5th of 10 lectures that we will sponsor or co-sponsor this season. We are a diverse support organization which is informed by the African American experience. We are committed to strengthening Chautauqua, and we do this in a variety of ways. We do it by encouraging and certainly welcoming diversity, by fostering honest conversations such as the Mirror Project, and by adding robust new voices to the programmatic mix. And you will hear one such voice here today. We are all beginning to understand it is important that we own both our past as well as our present. We in the AAHH are committed. We're committed to telling the stories that need to be told, primarily from the perspective of historically marginalized people. I encourage all of our viewers to visit our website, aaheritagehouse.org, to learn how you can support and even become involved in our work. As we are entirely supported by contributions, I also want to thank our many friends and supporters for making both last season and this season possible. Without your generosity, we would be unable to bring the quality speakers to Chautauqua that we have over the years and are doing so again this season. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for supporting this work. This week's thematic focus at Chautauqua is on the authentic comedic voice. Our speaker today is Steve Capers, Comedy Enthusiast, managing partner of Knock Knock Comedy Productions, and producer of the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest. Steve made his professional entry into the entertainment industry in 1993 when he became an executive at Black Entertainment Television, or as we know it, BET, in Los Angeles. It was through his informal work with the team behind BET's Comic View, hosted by D.L. Hughley, that Steve gained access and insights into the world of comedy. He continued his career in the world of comedy and entertainment as the head of Comedy Central's Chicago regional office. In 2009, he had the idea to produce a comedy festival featuring primarily African-American comedians who were on the cusp of stardom and whose performances were relevant, edgy, yet family-friendly. This culminated in the first Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest in 2010, featuring an upcoming artist called Damon Williams, and another one, A.J. Williams and Roz G. As part of the 7th Annual Comedy Fest in 2017, Capers designated August as Black Comedy Month. He believes his path in entertainment was set as a young boy while watching his Tony Award-winning aunt, Virginia Capers, as she performed as Lena Younger in Raisin, which of course is a musical version of Lorraine Hansberry's play A Raisin in the Sun. His groundbreaking work has certainly allowed us all to celebrate African-American comedic genius. But most importantly, it makes us all laugh. I am honored that he has agreed to share his thoughts with us here today, and I know you're going to find his remarks both enjoyable, enlightening, and certainly humorous. However, before we begin today's lecture, our live audience should know that you may submit questions for our live Q&A with Steve through the submission portal at questions.chq.org, which should be on your screen at the moment. You can do this from any mobile or desktop browser. Or if you use Twitter, use the hashtag CHQ2021. Today's remarks were pre-recorded. However, they will be followed by a live Q&A with Steve with questions submitted by our live audience tuning in all around the world. My fellow Chautauquans, the AAHH is pleased to present to you Steve Capers.
One of my favorite comedians, Richard Pryor, once said, "There's a thin line between to laugh with and to laugh at." That, I think, encapsulates the history of black comedy in our country. Because just as everything else in the black experience, we've had to make the best of sometimes awful situations and find joy and reason to laugh. Black comedians have been bringing us that TV joy and allowing us to laugh with each other for all of our history here in America. My name is Steve Capers, and I'm the managing partner, along with my wife, Dorothy, of Knock Knock Comedy Productions. I'm the founder of the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest and the trademark owner of Black Comedy Month. Most importantly, I am a comedy enthusiast who has used comedy as a way to entertain, as a medium to drive Black entrepreneurial success. I believe my path in entertainment was sparked as a young boy while watching my Tony Award-winning aunt, Virginia Capers, perform as Lena Younger in the Broadway play Raisin, a musical version of Lorraine Hansberry's play, A Raisin in the Sun. I remember vividly sitting in a corner backstage watching the cast move into position while the stagehands got ready for all phases of this live production. I was really amazed to see the details that went into the play, such as lighting, audio, set design, costumes, and much more. As I reflect back, I think having that exposure early on had quietly prepared me for a career in entertainment. Now note, my professional entertainment career began in 1993 when I joined Black Entertainment Television in Los Angeles. There I worked on some of the network's most iconic shows, including Video Soul with Donnie Simpson, Teen Summit, and Rap City. It was through my work at BET that I met comedic host D.L. Hughley, Ced the Entertainer, and some more on the set of BET's Comic View. At that point, my official induction in Black comedy was rooted. I can truthfully say that I was bitten by the comedy bug, especially after having a front row seat to see the variety of comedians to include Bruce, Lavelle Crawford, Earthquake, Ricky Smiley, Miss Laura, and many more. In 1998, I was recruited by Comedy Central to head up their Chicago regional headquarters. The network was founded in 1989 as the Comedy Channel, but was often depicted by many of the viewers as the white frat boy network due to its programming niche. But nevertheless, it was the first cable channel devoted exclusively to comedy-based programming. There I planned comedy events for nationally acclaimed comedians and personalities, including Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, Louis Black, Ben Stein, Adam Carolla, Bill Cosby, and Sinbad. I had a great run at Comedy Central. I was there at the rise of the animated sitcom South Park and the sketch comedy series The Dave Chappelle Show, both which had TV ratings off the roof during its peak. But as a bit of a side note, I would like to mention that I'm a huge fan of Dave Chappelle. I love the way he attacks intricate cultural topics. Dave's trademark humor of being outrageous and politically incorrect has earned him the prestigious Mark Twain Award in Humor in 2019. Making several movie appearances, booking national tours, and scoring deals with Netflix has grown Chappelle's net worth to approximately $50 million. I think that it's a general consensus that Chappelle is a comedic genius and will one day be recognized as one of the best ever stand-up comics, both black and or white. But moving forward, I was really proud to see that Comedy Central was willing to pay a black man multiple millions of dollars to star in his own self-titled series. However, after viewing the first episode, where it was a spoof on the PBS series Frontline, I began to feel a little uneased on how Comedy Central let the N-word fly so loosely. Here I am in a room comprised of majority white people, and all of a sudden I hear the word nigger, followed by laughter. My initial thought was not to overreact because I didn't want to be seen as this militant guy. After all, Dick Gregory, another one of my all-time favorite comics, titled his autobiography Nigger. So I'm saying to myself that this is probably okay for comics to use the N-word if he or she is making a point. But the laughter got bigger and bigger. Every time the word nigger was used, I cringed. At this point, I realized that my counterparts were laughing at the buffoonery of this black character and missing Chappelle's message that racism is a learned behavior. But what I took away from this situation is that the overuse of derogatory words in comedy takes away from the messaging. So I made a note to myself at that particular moment that I would create an upscale brand of comedy that would resonate with everyone, no matter what race, sex, or religion.
Gotta get older though, you know what I'm saying? They say men grow old gracefully. You know, women, y'all go through a little bit more in your aging process. Y'all had that middle part, you know. Y'all already know, when your body starts playing tricks on you, right? Temperature change for no reason. You don't know who you are. You go to red, fully dressed, you wake up butt naked. Right? You want the covers on, you want the covers off. You want to turn on the heat, turn on the air. I just turned on the heat, what's wrong? I'm hot, I'm cold, happy, man. What? Turn on the air, turn on the heat. What is wrong? I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm happy, man. My clothes dry, my coochie dry. What? My eye running, my wig itching, my throat is dry, my coochie dry. I got a onion, I got cockroach, what? Turn on the heat, turn on the air. Jesus, man. That's why you see older couples do be 10 steps ahead because they don't want to hear that. Slow down, I told you, my throat is dry, my throat is dry. My wig is my eye running. What? They're taking the pills, I didn't give you none. Why? Because my throat is dry.
After 5 years with the network, and with a lot of knowledge under my belt, I launched Knock Knock Comedy Productions in the summer of 2003 to produce upscale comedy events for corporations, nonprofits, and colleges and universities. We tailored our shows for conferences, fundraisers, and corporate events. My initial client list included Bell and Howell, North Carolina A&T, and Millikan University. Out of that came the idea of a monthly comedy show that I and comedian Damon Williams conceived called Funny First Saturdays. The show was launched in a small coffee shop in the Bronzeville area of Chicago's South Side. This monthly showcase was key to revitalizing a once vibrant comedy scene in the city that once had national recognition with clubs like the legendary All Jokes Aside in the 1990s. During that time, you saw a deep lineup of comics that included Michael Collier, George Wilborn, Bernie Mac, D. Ray, Tony Schofield, Dion Cole, Adele Givens, Kenny Howe, J.D., B. Cole, Marlon Mitchell, Leon Rogers, Corey Holcomb, and many more. Now, being on the fast track, if you will, Knock Knock Productions also produced Damon Williams' New Year's Eve Comedy Bash and many stand-up comedy networking events. Along the way, we were meeting and working with a national stable of comedians and cultivating new comedic stars. 2010 was a pivotal year for Knock Knock Comedy Productions. My wife and I were vacationing on Martha's Vineyard in 2009 when we began to discuss the idea of pulling off an African-American comedy festival. What better place than in Oak Bluffs, a spot frequented by black vacationers going back nearly a century? Dorothy encouraged me to go for it, realizing that top-tier comedic talent would be expensive, so I decided to work with emerging comics on the cusp of stardom. With early support from HBO, we were able to laugh and launch Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest in 2011. This first year, we featured Damon Williams from the Kings of Comedy Tour, AJ Jamal from In Living Color, and Roz G from Last Comic Standing. Damon became the host of the annual festival, and we saw a roster of comedians grow to include headliners like Tony Roberts, John Hinton, Tony Tone, Chastity Washington, and J.J. Williamson. Our nightly 2-hour show provided an enjoyable means of escapism for our guests during our early years. The festival was a safe space to reveal in comedy and entertainment from a black perspective. By 2018, we were ready to expand the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest to the entire month of August, and we created and trademarked Black Comedy Month, a heretofore unrecognized commemoration of black comedy. Today, it is one of the most prestigious celebrations of black comedy in the country, held every August. We characterize it this way: a black comedian walks into a club on Martha's Vineyard, and Black Comedy Month is born. This long overdue celebration of black comedy is more than just good, clean family entertainment. We also provide a historical perspective on the place that black comedy and comedians hold in the entertainment industry. We celebrate black comedic genius, and most importantly, we provide a showcase for both new and established comics to hone their craft and make us laugh. Black Comedy Month also affords us a unique platform to explore the evolution of black comedy. I often say the history of black comedy has taken us from blackface to black faces. If you were to read the program book for our past shows, you'll see we not only seek to entertain, but also to educate. We explore the backstory to black comedy history. The term "step and fetch it" brings up negative connotations for most of us. But with just a little bit of digging, you'll learn that the real life of Stephen Fetchit, who was named Lincoln Theodore Matthew Andrew Perry, broke barriers for more than 50 years beginning in the 1920s. Starting during the vaudeville era, he later found career success in Hollywood until being pushed out when prevailing sentiments turned against his type of humor. Yet without his knocking down barriers with the then studio execs, none of today's success in comedy would be even possible. Amos and Andy dominated both radio and television in some form over 3 decades. There was the most precedent-setting, hilarious, infamous, and divisive television shows ever aired. And the black actors who filled those roles for television were part of the training ground for directly connects to Moms Mabley, Red Fox, and Richard Pryor. The buffoonery that was a regular part of the show also fell from favor, yet is etched in our history and deserves to be explored as part of that time in our history. During Black Comedy Month, we want to explore all aspects of comedy, from Playing the Dozens to Dick Gregory, from Pigmeat Martin to our recently departed Paul Mooney, from Robin Harris to Red Fox, and from Bill Cosby to Dave Chappelle. For us at the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest, this is about portraying another part of our rich and, yes, complicated American history. We believe that history deserves to be told in its totality. Our comedy showcase and our comedy brand and what we call heart and soul comedy, comedians center their routines around the heart and soul of the everyday lives of African Americans. We celebrate the complexity of the African American experience. With us, one size does not fit all. A famous comic once said, "A comic says funny things. A comedian says things funny." Our comedians say things that are funny. When they talk about everyday black lives, they do it without the drama of foul language or questionable content. But most importantly, our comedians are funny. We feature both identifiable superstars while beginning a training ground for those on the cusp of stardom. After just 10 years, our next level comedians include George Wallace, Mark Curry, Tony Roberts, Roz G, Howie Bell, and B. Flat. And others have seen our vision and believe in it. Over our 10 years on Martha's Vineyard, our sponsors have included BET, the Smithsonian Channel, Red's Apple Ale, Budweiser, and of course HBO. We also have a commitment to the community that has given us so much, and we are so thankful for the partnership. We would like to recognize groups like the Polar Bears of Martha's Vineyard and the news organization This Week on Martha's Vineyard. Today, the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest is a recognized brand featured in commercials, sitcoms, books, across social media channels, and our shows are features on streaming services. Certainly, even great ideas are not realized in a vacuum. They require hard work, persistence, and attention to detail. Our success would not be possible without the comedians, club owners, and fans that have supported us for more than a decade. I'll say the future for both the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest and Black Comedy Month are so bright, and it's evident with the amount of support we receive through sponsorships and fan support. Plans are underway to expand our brand with emphasis on streaming platforms, building a performing arts center, and of course, making people laugh, because we're all about the funny. Now that you know that I'm a comedy enthusiast, I want to switch gears to zone into the foundation of African American comedic voice or voices. Comedy's African American roots stem from slavery, where the groundwork was laid. It served as a critical role in the survival of people snatched from their homeland and sold into slavery. The cruel conditions of slavery and the extreme methods instituted to degrade and dehumanize people created a need for ingenuity to survive the reality of slavery. To this day, comedy oftentimes brings humor to critical and trying issues and serves as a survival mechanism. In the documentary, Why We Laugh, Black Comedians on Black Comedy, it is stated that as the Black experience evolved in America, humor served as a means of expression and inspiration. In the 1940s, W.E.B. Du Bois stated that God mercifully grants the divine gift of laughter to the oppressed and unfortunate to overcome and endure adversity. Slaves turned to humor in the form of passive aggression irony, and parody as a means of dealing with their slave master. The African American humor tradition is predominantly ironic because it developed in a historical context that was never entirely hopeless, and instead of only expression, cynicism, or despair. The irony and the humor served as a defense mechanism. The foundation was laid, and the comedy in African American culture continued to evolve. From early 1880s until early 1930s, Black vaudeville offered an opportunity for African American performers to bring forth a unique style of entertainment. African American vaudeville performers dealt with injustice at the hands of theater owners, but lent their voice through art to repress people. At the turn of the 20th century, Burt Williams and George Walker were highly sought after comedians, becoming two of the most prominent figures of the minstrel era and a famous duo. Most significant, in 1903, Williams and Walker partnered with composer Will Marion Cook, playwright Jesse Shipp, and poet lyrics Paul Laurence Dunbar to produce In Dahomey, the first full-length musical to open on Broadway that was written and performed entirely by African Americans. In 1918, the New York Dramatic Mirror called Williams one of the greatest comedians of the world, also recognized by a fellow vaudeville, W.C. Fields, who appeared in production with Williams, described him as the funniest man I ever saw and the saddest man I ever knew. Another significant time period was the 1930s to 1960s when African American comedians, musicians, and other entertainers performed the Chitlin Circuit, composed of a network of black-owned nightclubs, dance halls, juke joints, and theaters in the South, on the East Coast, and also in the Midwest. That's where it was safe and acceptable for African Americans to perform in during the Jim Crow era of racial segregation. These clubs sold chitterlings, aka chitlins, so hence the name. Ironically, chitlins are a dish that date back to slavery, made from pig intestines. This dish is an African American culinary experience. The Chitlin Circuit included notable venues such as the Cotton Club and Apollo Theaters in New York, Harlem, the Royal Peacock in Atlanta, the Douglas Theater in Macon, the Fox Theater in Detroit, and the Howard Theater in Washington. Many renowned African American performers owe their start to the Chitlin Circuit. Two of the well-known comedians that got their start playing the Chitlin Circuit include Red Fox and, of course, Moms Mabley, known as the First Lady of African American culture.
Now, I guess everyone has their aggravations, especially in certain situations. Now, remember, I don't know what you children's might be, but here's one thing that kind of aggravates me. For instance, company happen to drop in. Especially if they've been drinking too much gin. I say, now listen, if you're my friend, don't sit on my bed. Oh, now don't get me wrong. It's not that I think that your clothes ain't clean. And you know, Mom, I ain't never been mean. But there's a chair. Sit there. Don't sit on my bed.
The Chitlin Circuit paved the way for Moms Mabley to be a star in the films and on stage, and for Red Fox to star in film and also have his own show, Sanford and Sons. A significant aspect of comedy in African American culture comes from a political perspective. Several African American comedians have used their comedic platform to present issues that affect African Americans often. We see a parallel between slaves performing John and Old Massa, in which slave owners were mocked, and the satirical format of present-day comedians. Some of these comedians include Paul Mooney, Dick Gregory, Richard Pryor, Whoopi Goldberg, Wanda Sykes, Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy, and Dave Chappelle. In many instances, these comedians have been the voice of the people, bringing forth relevant political and socio-economical issues to the American people. Comedy has provided an avenue for political and social activism tied up with a bunch of laughter. Hundreds of years later, after slavery, when the foundation was laid, the practice of mockery can be heard in the streets across America as African Americans engage in playing the dozens, also known as signifying. Playing the dozen is a game of put-downs involving the rapid exchange of insults, often targeting family members, a comedic exchange between two people meant to make people laugh. Comedy has spread from the plantation fields to the streets. Example: street corners, barbershops, hair salons, backyards, and of course card tables. As well, African American comedy has strong presence on stage, television, film, and social media. But the African American comedic voice is going to get louder. I would suspect from recent national headlines such as the pandemic, the George Floyd murder, the January 6th insurrection, voter suppression, gun laws, and false conspiracy theories. And the list of headlines can trickle down to local issues as well. Everything from mental health, our educational system, poverty, gun violence, drugs and alcohol, sexual assault, and many more. As I conclude, I want the members of AAHH to realize that laughter is so important and that we should make a habit of laughing daily. Start off small by laughing at yourself, your children, your parents, or significant other. Just with that alone, that can give you a good 5 minutes of material. And then maybe next year you'll be on the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest. You'll be amazed how your attitude would change because happiness and frustration can't occupy the same space. It's just totally impossible. So continue to learn and love through laughter. And be sure to join me virtually or in person this August as we celebrate African American humor and the 10th annual Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest. Thank you.
Because life's so easy for them now, they don't know how easy life is. Like when it's snow now, and it's snow and they can't go to school, you know how they find out school closed? They go on the school website, say school closed. Shit, they get to sleep in. What we have to do, we have to wake up at 6 a.m. and watch every school in the state. St. Mary's, St. Joseph's, St. Elizabeth of the Immaculate Reception Club. In big bold red ass letters, all Chicago public schools will be open. Life easy for them. They should get all A's. Shit. They should get, because if you tell them to do like a book report, what's the first thing they do? Google it. Have the book report done. What did we have to do? We had to learn the Dewey Decimal System to go to the library to get that long-ass tray of cards. You in there for 4 hours looking for a book on butterflies. Shit, I ain't going outside today. This is bullshit. Now they email the parents' grades. Now, did y'all know that? They email. What we had to do, we had to bring our grades to our parents. You ever get bad grades and try to act like you lost them on the way home? I tried that one time with my mother. I came home, she was like, "Where your grades?" I was like, "Oh, mama. Oh, I lost them, mama. That's okay, because I'm going to get up tomorrow. I'm going to take off work." Yeah, I'm taking off work. And I'm going up to that school, and I'm going to get your grades. And then I'm going to find out what room you in. And as soon as I see you, I'm like, "Here they go, mama. Here they go." They was just deep in my pocket. I don't know about y'all, but if I'm going to get an ass whooping, I'm taking it at home. Nobody got to know but me, my mama, and the neighbors. You get a whooping at school, your friends will never let you live that day. You see them 20 years later, they'll be like, "Remember when your mama threw you across the classroom?" Now, I remember that shit. Just give me $10 on pump 3. You know?
Thank you for that presentation. I'm not supposed to be laughing as I start the interview, but I am. Thank you for your presentation. It was certainly educational as well as humorous. When we talk about black comedy today, there's obviously an elephant in the room, and that is Bill Cosby. So what is the comedy enthusiast view of Bill Cosby?
That's a great question, and it's also a tough question to answer. You know, when you look at Bill Cosby, you want to judge him for his comedy and not anything else. So when I look at Bill Cosby from the comedy perspective, he's one of the greatest out there. He's the kind of comedian that can take you on a journey. He has a lot of twists and turns and ups and downs, and he could take a typical situation and just make it funny. And so his comedic mind is just on a whole different level. So I have an appreciation for him in terms of that. Now, his personal and other things is kind of tough to, to separate. But if I can just solely judge him for his comedic talent, he's one of the best out there.
I'm sure that answer is not going to satisfy everyone, but if we look back in history, he's probably not the only one that creates this dichotomy. Fatty Arbuckle did back in the 20s as well. Talk to me a little bit about the impact of social media on comedy.
Well, social media is a huge impact on the comedy game. In fact, one of the comedians that's performing at the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest this year, I discovered on Instagram or in YouTube. So you have a different kind of comedian that's being developed. A lot of these social media comedians are doing a lot of skits. Skits are a little bit different than stand-up comedy. Skits are a lot of impromptu, and you can kind of go in different directions, and you can retake and do all that sort of stuff. But when you're on stage and you have an audience of 200, 300, 400 people, there's no stepping back. You got to keep going, moving forward, and you have to be funny.
The concept of being funny and being black in America sometimes don't quite coincide. And so, I shouldn't say often, every once in a while I will hear someone say, what is funny about being black in America? And what would be your response to that type of statement?
Well, what I always say, how I answer that question is that the healing process begins once we're able to laugh. One of the things I had mentioned earlier, that the mind can't occupy happiness and sadness, or being frustrated or happy at the same time. So it's almost you have to choose one. So when you see that a person is laughing, that's part of the healing process. But the thing is too is that we all have things in common, and that's that blackness. So we have these experiences that we can share, and when we get a comic to articulate it in such a comedic way, it just makes everybody laugh. So being black, we share a lot of experiences. So it's the way we bond, it's the way we understand each other.
Let me say that we have explored a lot of issues in our forums this year, and your questions are pouring in faster than any other. So,
okay.
Let me go back to one of the first things you mentioned, and this is from a questioner, and I will read it. You mentioned Comedy Central being known as the frat boy house of comedy. Do you think there's a difference between African American comedy and white comedy?
Oh, there's a huge difference. I mean, if you look at the audience, even at a black comedy show, a comedian has to be funny right away. He cannot develop a joke. He has to come in and rapid fire for the most part. With white audience, they look at their comic, they give you the A for effort. So you got that. But then again, we have two different experiences. But they can gel both together. So when you have your mainstream comedian, for example, Dave Chappelle, he can have a large white audience, you got a large black audience. So
he has that mix. But it is a difference because we have different experiences.
You started, of course, and you mentioned, it was mentioned in your bio, the number of white comedians with whom you had worked. So why did you and how did you end up focusing primarily on black comedy?
So it's almost like I was the Pied Piper for bringing in African American comedians to Comedy Central. When we do our events, again, we had the Jon Stewarts, we had the Ben Stein, but we wanted to have a little bit more diversity. So one of my initiatives was to ensure that we can get African American comedians or just comedians of color on the stage for Comedy Central. One of the things I was talking to them that is just a huge market out there that we're missing out. And so, let's bring some originality, some uniqueness. And when you look at other networks like, say, HBO, when they were doing Def Comedy Jam, they were getting huge ratings. Then also with BET, with Comic View, these were the only platforms nationally. So I wanted to see if I can do anything to encourage more African American comedians to be on a bigger stage.
Tell me, this is another question that's come in. I think it's an interesting one. We're often looking into the future. What does the future stand-up comedian look like? What does stand-up comedy look like in our future?
Well, I think we have to depend on technology now. One of the things that is happening is that, social media has made it possible for us to upload content and to share and bring and develop followers. So one of the things we did during this pandemic was we invited 20 other comedy enthusiasts and we recorded shows of comedians and we were able to broadcast that through Vimeo. So we actually went a whole digital route with stand-up comedy. And so I do think that is the future.
You mentioned in your talk a subject with which I have some familiarity, and that's called playing the dozens. One of our questioners doesn't quite have that familiarity, and he wanted you to talk a little bit more about the concept of playing the dozens and its history.
Yeah, so the dozens is actually an old game that we played. But what happened was it originated from African American slaves going back and forth with each other in front of their slave masters. But what they were doing were actually mocking the slave masters. So that dozen kind of cultural thing just kind of progressed even into today. So I got like 3 of my friends from grammar school. We hook up every so often. And the first thing we want to do is just, after we say hi, is kind of throw out a joke, an insult or something like that, just to show that common bond that we have. But yeah, dozens are, if you go into the barbershops, if you're playing cards or something, you got to talk a lot of smack. So it's just part of our brotherly love. We mean no harm from it, but there was a dozen slaves, going back to the history that will kind of go back and forth with each other. And so that's how it became the dozens.
A question which talks a little bit about differences. What's the difference between a stand-up comedian and a comic actor?
So I would say Will Smith is a comedic actor. He actually had tried to become a stand-up comedian, but didn't do well. But he's still a funny guy, and so his character, he's able to get into character and play a particular role. Tiffany Haddish is a character actor. Her stand-up is good, but it's not as good as her character act may be. And a stand-up comic is someone who's just purely flat-footed, stands in front of the audience, and makes people laugh every 10 to 15 seconds.
We have a viewer who's interested in whether you take your Comedy Fest on the road, and he or she is particularly interested in whether you're willing to bring it to Chautauqua.
I would love to bring it there. So what we're trying to do is actually put a tour together called The Road to Martha's Vineyard. And basically, it's the best of the fest where we take comedians to perform from the festival and put them on tour. So we're actively looking for sponsors, and we wanted to, like I say, go everywhere. Of course, we're going to hit every major market, then we'll hit every mid market. But it is something in the making. And so So look out for that. But also, too, we produce shows for organizations and groups and what have you. So we can bring that brand of comedy anywhere across the country.
I neglected when we first started in not congratulating you on your 10-year anniversary. Not a lot of things last 10 years in America. What role, on a more serious note, which is a difficult challenge when you're talking about comedy, what role does racism play in the career of most black comedians?
That's a good question. So what happens is that most African American comedians aren't performing in white comedy clubs. So they're not getting discovered as rapidly, So if you're in Chicago, which is a huge comedy market, but yet you won't see any of the talent scouts from Hollywood or New York or anything like that come into a small room. And what's happening too is that you don't see many black or African American owned comedy clubs. What we do now is create rooms. And these small rooms, again, you're not going to get that executive to come in there and see who's funny. So that's when social media plays a big role, when they see you got followers and they see your content and that you're funny and that you're relevant. But so racism, it's not necessarily like they're racist. It's just that they just don't know where to go. So like, again, with me being at Comedy Central during that period, I was the Pied Piper getting people to look at different comedians. So comedians like Owen Smith, Craig Robinson, who's, these guys, I got them when they were young and gave them exposure. So pretty happy about that. So just need more people like me to really brand and get the awareness out. And that's why we also have Black Comedy Month, which I trademarked, which we wanted to be a national campaign.
Thank you. We sometimes hear that comedians today are reluctant to go to college campuses because the fear of offending someone and the negative reactions that they might get there. And Michael Che, I forget, I don't know how to pronounce his name, on Saturday Night Live has recently come under fire for making fun of Simone Biles. People consider this punching down. Do you think are there any topics that really should be off limits to comedy?
So I had a conversation with the legendary Dick Gregory, and he told me that timing is everything. You can't tell a joke that is too current and too sensitive. You have to let people heal, let time pass a little bit before you can really go there. Now, unless you're going to do something current like Simone Biles, if you're trying to educate somebody in your routine, but to put her down right now is not a good thing, especially with mental illness being a huge thing and that's being more prevalent and discovered. You don't really want to go there in terms of that. But if the joke has a punch where it's helping and giving almost advice, then it's okay. But you gotta give things time.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit more about Black Comedy Month.
With Black Comedy Month, what we're trying to do is really provide a platform to showcase African American humor. And the main thing is for us to celebrate it. And, in my talk, I talked about our playbill that we have every year. And we look at different past comedians that we want to pay tribute and honor to. So that's one of the huge things about it. But everyone who's a comedy enthusiast, someone who is just a big supporter of comedy, we want everyone to benefit from it and also provide that platform to showcase new talent. So it has many prongs to it, and so we're in our, I think, 4th or 5th year of really promoting it, and we're just trying to make it bigger and better. So every August is Black Comedy Month.
Thank you. I have a question here about the impact or the role of comedy in the cultural life of Martha's Vineyard. So how does Black comedy enhance quality of cultural life at Martha's Vineyard? How does Black comedy increase racial understanding for all? Which may be two separate questions.
Yeah. Well, just being in Martha's Vineyard, you have a different clientele than most comedy club goers. Our brand of comedy is that you can't use any derogatory terms. You can't bash the audience. You have to really, be relevant and current with with your routine. And so we deal mostly with professional comics who can read an audience and they know what direction to go. So we do give a little bit of, put a couple of handcuffs, on some of the comedians, but we give them the free reign to say and do whatever. But again, I try to minimize the cursing in our routine. If it's part of the joke, we're totally fine, but we don't want you to use it as a crutch. So, this is in Martha's Vineyard, you have a proud crowd of African American people, affluent people. I mean, you never know. President Barack might walk into our space, and so you can't. That's the kind of client base you have here. So you can't be in the dirt with your material. And what was the second question about that?
Let me bring that back up here. I'll circle back to that because I think it was a bit unrelated. But
okay,
what is the real difference between someone who is funny, because often we throw the term around that you're really funny, versus an actual comedian? Not that I'm planning to go on the road or anything like that, but tell me what the difference is. Yeah.
Well, comedy is very subjective. So what I might think is funny, you may not think is funny. So it really depends on the individual to understand what funny is to them. Slipping on a banana peel, that might be funny to me, but you may think that's, this guy might be hurt. But we can find humor and stuff like that. So it's just really your sensitivity and your sense of humor that equates what's funny.
What has surprised you most about the reaction to black comedy and black comedians? What has been surprising to you?
Well, I tell you, I've gotten so many testimonials from people who said, I really needed that laugh. I'm glad you were able to bring your show to us. And so it almost feels like now I really, really have a sense of purpose in terms of bringing these shows, because I know that this is almost like medicine to so many people. And sometimes you just got to get away from your day-to-day environment and just have fun being a part of some fun and joy and laughter.
Let me circle back to the question that I had lost in the digital ether space here, which was, how does black comedy increase racial understanding for all?
That's a good question. How does it increase? I don't want to just throw out answers. I need to put a little thought to that. But my initial thought is that as long as we can laugh and continue to laugh, we're going to get more understanding. And again, if you can laugh at something, you have an understanding of what's happening. And again, I wish this could be the magic pill that can just stop anything bad, but it's not. But it's just give us a sense of, let me stop, let me think, let me laugh, and and move on. This whole laughter works well in corporate events. It gives you that understanding why you laugh at a boss's joke. It may not be funny, but you might laugh at it. So.
Have you considered becoming a comedian yourself?
Well, people say I'm funny, but I would never get on stage. I would leave that to the professionals, because that stage could be very lonely up there if you're there for 40, 50 minutes and you're not making the people laugh like you want to.
We have a question from another civic promoter. We talked earlier about you taking your show on the road, particularly to Chautauqua, and this questioner wanted to remind you that Jamestown, of course, is the home of the National Comedy Center. And have you worked with them? Have you considered any exchange with the National Comedy Center and the Martha's Vineyard Comedy Fest?
No, I have not. I would like to look into that and partner. And again, if we can increase the platform to showcase African-American comedic talent, I would love that. What we've been doing is kind of working independently and trying to make Martha's Vineyard the epicenter of black comedy. So, again, there's plenty of room for comedy, and I welcome any partnership and opportunity to promote African-American humor.
Well, we'll try and get you offline a contact with the National Comedy Center.
Please do. Please do.
My last question. pending some more coming in online. And some more just came in online, so I'll hold my last question. And this one that came in is about advice, and that is, what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about going into comedy, either for fun or professionally?
It could be a tough road. What I would also say is just you got to get on stage, you got to get in there, and start doing jokes, start doing open mics. And what happened is that you might escalate. You may not be the famous comedian like a Cat Williams or Dave Chappelle or anyone like that, but these guys need writers. So, that stage can be your opportunity to become a writer for a lot of these big name comedians, or even with different shows, Hollywood shows and things of that nature. So I would just say jump in it from that standpoint. As a promoter standpoint, I would say, you need to partner with someone. Because you're going to take a lot of losses in the beginning. And so, if you can stomach the loss, then you go out by yourself. But I would encourage partnership.
But do you suggest, and I want to make sure I understand your answer, do you suggest that it may be a smoother route or easier route to go in as a writer versus just going on stage cold as a comedian?
Well, I think you need to go on stage so that you can feel the pulse of what's funny, and then, take your material to become a writer if you don't become that national acclaimed comedian. That's what I was using that for an example. But, and then again, as a promoter, I would always say go on, partner with someone so that you can reduce a lot of your loss at the beginning.
Well, my last question that I had written down, and it's come in really several forms online as well, and that is the role of comedy in the life of the Black community. What do you believe that role is, or how do you see that role?
Well, it plays a huge role in the Black community. And particularly in Martha's Vineyard, when I'm here, I get so many testimonials about how important this is to them. They look forward to this. We've become one of the premier events on the island. And so being a summer attraction is flattering to us. And so it plays a huge role in our daily lives. So always look for something that's funny just to kind of break the monotony. And so that would be my advice is about the role of comedy.
Great. Well, we are getting near the end of the hour. Let me close a bit by first asking you what question were you posed to answer that I should have asked you and didn't?
Oh, no, I think you did a great job hosting and asking questions, so I think we're all set with that.
Okay, great. So let me say first, thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Congratulations again on the 10th anniversary of Comedy Success, the Comedy Fest. Continued success to you in the future. And I wouldn't totally write off that career as a comedian, however.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
You take
right,
care.
And thank you, guys. I appreciate you.
Let me thank all of those that are viewing here today. We'll be back again next week. Our guest next week will be Wes Moore, renowned author and budding politician. We, of course, don't know which Wes Moore we're going to get if you read his books, but nonetheless, it is going to be yet one more interesting and stimulating session. And I look forward to seeing all of you. In terms of upcoming events, don't forget we have weekly porch chats on at 1 o'clock on Sundays on the porch of the Athenaeum. I look forward to seeing you there as well. And with that, we'll sign off, say thank you, and see you next week.
CHQ Assembly is made possible through the collaboration and innovation of Chautauqua Institution's full-time and part-time staff, seasonal staff, and many volunteers, as well as participants like you, whose engagement, gifts, and subscriptions sustain our mission.